Third weekend and counting. And if the international community secretly hoped it could stay out of it and that maybe one of Sudan's warring generals could settle their long-simmering rivalry with a quick blow, well, it's time to face reality. With no clear winner in sight, the capital Khartoum is being laid to ruin. Civilians who braved bullets for 4 years to demand an end to military rule can only hunker down or flee, where fleeing is, of course, an option. Particularly alarming are reports of militias in places like Darfur taking sides as civilians try to make their way out to neighboring countries. To be fair, foreign players have tried to broker truces. We'll tell you about the latest one that's been announced. But is it time to change tact, to sanction junta leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his nominal number 2, Hemeti, head of the RSF paramilitaries? The U.S., Egypt, Gulf states need to agree that neither one is fit to rule. With Egypt backing Burhan, with Russia and the Emirates in business with Hemeti and the gold mines he controls, who to prevent what the UN warns could be an exodus of 800,000 from the country. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking how to stop the spiral in Sudan. With us, Claire Nicolet, she's the coordinator of Sudan operations for the French aid organization MSF, Doctors Without Borders. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much.
We're joined from Port Sudan by Muzan Al-Nil, non-resident fellow at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
From London, Alam Ahmed, the founder of the International Diaspora Project. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And from Nairobi, Mathilde Vu, Sudan Advocacy Manager at the Norwegian Refugee Council. Welcome.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Over 100,000 have fled to neighboring countries. 3 times more have been displaced internally, so says the United Nations. Charlie James has more.
An emergency Arab League meeting for the second time, with Sudan topping the agenda. Although nothing concrete came of the gathering, Sudanese authorities called on the Arab League's member states to condemn the Rapid Support Forces, the paramilitary force battling Sudan's military in Khartoum.
Sudan is still suffering from the violations and attacks that have been committed by the rebel Rapid Support Forces militia on government facilities, military sites, in various residential neighborhoods, in government institutions, hospitals, and schools, despite the existence of the truce proposed by the Saudi and American sides.
Both Saudi Arabia and the US are leading efforts to find a diplomatic solution to the conflict. Sudan's 2 rival camps have already agreed to a ceasefire, overseen by both countries. But the UN says neither side is respecting the agreement.
None of the ceasefires has been respected in total. They have all been respected partially and sometimes only in some locations and not in others.
There is a slight glimmer of hope, though. On Monday, the UN said the 2 warring generals had agreed to send representatives to negotiate, potentially in Saudi Arabia.
Let me begin with you, Muzan Al-Nil. First off, tell us what the situation is like where you are now in Port Sudan.
Well, thank you. Yeah, in Port Sudan, many have been internally displaced from Khartoum and other cities where fighting is taking place between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF. Both are, one private militia and one governmental militia in an absurd war in the capital and in other cities. We have thousands of Sudanese people who have been displaced to Port Sudan, a relatively small city that is barely able to provide for this number of people. Many of them at the port who started the makeshift camps, trying to leave Sudan, trying to figure out some way to get a visa, or even some of them are trying to relocate themselves to Port Sudan. The humanitarian situation in general is dire. We're getting a lot of help by mutual aid and by popular initiatives and from the resistance committees, or those using the ways of the neighborhood resistance committees by providing to the people, bringing water, bringing food, even paying for some of the needs of the people who have been displaced. Of course, we are not seeing UNHCR or any other international organization doing that. I have just moved from Khartoum 2 days ago, and if I may tell you about the situation in Khartoum, it is horrible. It was already a horrible economic situation before the war started, for decades of poverty or impoverishment that many people have been living under, and also the coup has added to that. And then when this war started, it basically took over the very little infrastructural services that we have in Sudan. People now not able to reach hospitals. Also in Khartoum, I left people dependent on nothing but mutual aid and popular support, with a lot of very good initiatives that are trying. Some of them have even restarted and reopened some of the hospitals that previous governments did not bother to spend on to open. We have a lot of neighborhoods creating networks to provide for each other. Also, since both of the fighting parties did not have no interest in people's best interest and already bombing water stations or disabling electricity stations, many houses do not have access to those kinds of services, but neighbors are trying to help each other with that. So what we are seeing is a horrible humanitarian situation on top of an already failing infrastructure that is only finding support and help by the popular initiatives of the Sudanese people and no one but that.
Well, we've just had the connection has been patched in with Khartoum itself. We can cross to Alaeddin Awad Nogood, a spokesperson for the Sudanese Professionals Association, which is an organization that's played a key role in the negotiations before and after the ouster of Omar al-Bashir in 2019. Thank you for speaking with us here in the France 24 debate. You just heard Muzan al-Nil, who fled the capital 2 days ago. What's the situation like right now where you are?
Okay, thank you for the interview, Francois, and thank you for having me in the debate in France 24. The situation is horrible, as your first guest who was in the phone said. Actually, today is the 18th day of the eruption of the violence and the war in the central capital of Sudan, in Khartoum, where nobody believed that the capital will be in a war. I think all the people in the past thinking about the war in the peripheries in Darfur and in the south of Sudan, but right now the war is in the capital. Today is the 18th day. It should be supposed to be a ceasefire, the second day of ceasefire, but there was no ceasefire since yesterday. There is a very huge air force strike by the Sudan Armed Forces.
Yeah, we saw Alaeddin, we saw the smoke, the plumes of smoke coming from the area around the airport. Where are you in relation to that?
I'm in Durman, the second city of Khartoum. You know, Khartoum capital is 3 cities: Durman, Khartoum, and Khartoum North or Bahri, and they are connected with the bridge over the River Nile. I'm in Durman. Durman, mainly the violence and the war is mainly the conflict areas are in the south of Durman, near a big military base that's called Al Muhandisin, or the engineering department of the army, and in the most north of Durman, that's where the airport that was used for evacuation of the foreign diplomatic delegates, that's called Wadi Sayyidna. This airport that worked for evacuation of the delegates for the previous week, like of 7 days or more. This area was on attack like 2 days ago, where and in the beginning of the eruption of this war, because there is 2 bases. One base for the Rapid Support Forces, a big camp, and another one for the military bases of the Sudan Army. And actually, it's a big military area for Sudan Army, including the military college, the military press, the military signal academy, and so. So this area was bombed in the beginning 2 days of the war by air strikes, and they get out the Rapid Support Forces of their camp, and it was completely controlled by the military. In the previous 3 or 4 days, there is, I think, some clashes. The Rapid Support Forces started, I think, to regain back or start to thinking regaining back this area, because it's the only 2 areas that's left in the capital not controlled by Rapid Support Forces. That is the military area in the south of Durman and in the north of Durman. This is
let me bring in Alam Ahmed on this, because This has been, does this mesh with the stories we've been hearing that on the one hand, you have the regular army that's got the heavy firepower, that's got the air power, and on the other hand, you have Hemedti's RSF paramilitaries who've been fighting essentially an urban guerrilla warfare.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is going to continue for, I don't know how long it will take, but this is exactly the best description of it. You got the military, which is a proper, highly professional military. They are conducting its operations in a way it has to make sure it can protect the civilian, and also using the tactics as the military, how they want. They normally been trained to deal with this kind of attacks. But on the other hand, the militia is causing a lot of challenges for the military because, according to the military spokesman several times, they said they attack them in some ways in whatever the place, and then they will run inside where civilians are actually living, and some of them they go on the roof of buildings, so like shooters. So this will continue, but I think it's I don't know how long it will continue, but definitely it will not go for long because both of them they are going to be exhausted very soon, particularly the rapid support forces, because it's not the official army. They are not getting the enough supply they will require, but also there is lots of evidence we are hearing from Khartoum and from other parts of Sudan that the rapid support forces in particular, they are now hunting for every single doctor they can find on the street because they need to get treatment for their injuries. We hear lots of stories from those who just been evacuated from Khartoum arriving in the UK. One doctor is telling that he was very, very worried to be kidnapped by the rapid support forces because if they know that he's or they knew he's a doctor, they will either kidnap him or they might he will disappear. So these are all signs that the rapid support forces they will soon become very fatigued compared to the army. Both of them they are going to be needing a break at least through this war because there is no water supplies, there is no food, everyone is struggling. And also not forget, this army, they are individuals, the same like the other civilians. They will need to eat, they will need to rest, they will need electricity, they will need to charge their mobile phone, everything. So I think what is going on in the country is also affecting the army and the rapid support forces. But everyone is now calling for them to stop this as soon as possible because the consequences of what is happening in Sudan is making the humanitarian situation extremely out of control.
Let's talk about it with
70%.
Let's talk about it with Claire Nicolet here just a minute, because you have teams all over Sudan. First off, we heard this prediction that we just heard from Alam that the intense fighting like this couldn't continue after week 1. We're now into week 4. It is continuing. As far as doctors and medical teams, how are they coping?
So that's a very difficult situation. We speak about Khartoum, we speak about Darfur as well, of course. So the first problem is that people are being trapped. So they cannot move inside the cities, meaning that they cannot go to the hospitals. We heard about hospitals being looted. We heard about hospitals not functioning anymore. That's very true. But it's also the case that wounded cannot go to the hospital to search for healthcare. So this is a situation in Khartoum. This is a situation in Al-Fashir, where we are still team. This is a situation in Janina, where none of the hospitals are still working, and they cannot evacuate even the wounded to Chad. So this we can also discuss a bit about that because it's very...
Yeah, I want to ask you about Darfur in a moment, but first off, getting you heard the concern there expressed by Alam Ahmed. How do you get humanitarian aid in? Last Thursday, when we discussed Sudan on this panel, we had a guest from Port Sudan saying these ships that are coming in to pick up refugees, why aren't they laden with supplies, with medicine?
Yeah, so this is the request we are doing at the moment to authorities, Sudanese authorities, to make enter cargo, medical supply, but also teams, because we need really reinforcement of our teams, all the humanitarian actors and health actors in particular, because, of course, this situation, lots of people fled. from Khartoum, for instance. And as we mentioned before, most of the places now they are not functioning anymore. No supply, no fuel, no water. It's mentioned by the other guest as well. So now we are really in this situation. We need to make enter-supply, we need reinforcement, we need to have a humanitarian response now. So this is really one of the main problems we have now, to be able to really respond to all the needs, the wounded patients all over the place in Khartoum, in Darfur. So this is really the situation. We really need some flights, some planes, some boats as well to arrive and to be able to deliver all this to the population.
And before I turn to Mathilde Vu, just a quick question, very briefly. Mouzan Al-Nil, we had a guest, like I said, from Port Sudan last week. Her concern, coming from Khartoum like you did 2 days ago, was seeing militiamen along the road and sort of evidence that the fighting that had begun in the capital was beginning to fan out. Did you, once you got out of Khartoum and were on the road, how were things between there and where you are now? We seem to have lost the connection there.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear? We can hear you now. Mouzan Al-Nil, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. So what I was saying is that outside of Khartoum, we saw checkpoints that were populated by sometimes the RSF, sometimes the army, but mostly it was the RSF. I think it is not really the main thing to look at which one of them. And I would like to go back to what your guest said about the army being the more professional side of this war, which is not what I saw. In reality, we all know that within less than 4 hours from the first bullet, the army was, its fighter jets were shelling inside the capital. So it's not exactly an army with a lot of interest in the best interests of the people or even maintaining their lives. To think that there's any difference between having the RSF or the army over there is misleading, to say the least. In reality, we just have two parties with no interest in our livelihood that are fighting all over. Also, as your other guest said, we're seeing a lot of fighting in Jenaina. It seems like the situation in Jenaina is even worse. The health infrastructure has been totally destroyed. There isn't even accurate numbers of the number of people killed over the past week in Jenaina. So yeah, the situation is not just bad in Khartoum, but all over the country. That is definitely true.
Mathilde Vu, at this point in time, do you see any sign that, because there's been this announcement that's come from neighbouring South Sudan in the past hours of a 7-day truce that would go into effect on Thursday, any sign that these two sides are ready for a break?
I mean, these past 18 days have shown that for the moment, any commitment to ceasefires have not held. I mean, there was a ceasefire not a very long time ago, and at the same time, we've seen 5 days of intense violence in West Darfur, for example. I'm talking about armed group fighting in the middle of the city, destroying houses, destroying displacement camps where people were living under tents, saw their house being burned down, and they had to flee. And I'm talking about people who've been attacked 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times over the past 3 years, and now they have nowhere to flee. So this whole question of ceasefire, I mean, for us at the Norwegian Refugee Council, we think that the foreign policy has been very much focused on ceasefires, but it's time for the diplomacy to also look at humanitarian diplomacy, like talking about mitigation to avoid civilian harm, and also the respect of humanitarian assistance and the respect of humanitarian worker inside the country. This needs to happen regardless of ceasefire. So
to answer Claire Nicolet's request, which is to be able to get her teams in, to get supplies in, how do you twist the arms of the fighting parties at this point?
I'm not sure humanitarian organizations are in the position to twist any arms. But there's definitely a lot of things to work on. I mean, our colleagues from MSF talked about getting people inside the country and supplies, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to be done also with the neighboring countries to allow air bridges, for example, and supplies to get into the country, not only through Port Sudan, but also to other places. Like, for example, you know, in White Nile, which is at the border of South Sudan, our teams are seeing thousands of people coming in. A lot of them are actually South Sudanese refugees who had to flee Khartoum and now have to go back to refugee camps along the Niles that are already completely neglected and have barely any services. Supplies needs to come also through this route, you know. And West Darfur, as we talked about, has been completely cut off from any routes because of the violence, and it was going to be very, very difficult to get anybody in or any supplies in coming from Port Sudan, which is on the other side of the country. So again, talking with maybe Chadian authorities to try and offer routes inside Darfur would be also very important.
Mathilde making the point that the Sudanese, the Darfur civil war, unfortunately never went away, even though there was the high point of it, you might say, or the most heated point of it was some 15 to 20 years ago. There still had been fighting. The Sudanese have been fleeing as local militias have gotten drawn in, particularly brutal in those parts you can see on this map where there's that enmity left over. The United Nations reporting 96 killed in a West Darfur massacre that took place a little under 2 weeks ago on April the 24th. Witnesses say militia members from the ethnic Masalit and well-armed Arab communities soon joined the fray. The fighting there now forcing those to flee. Sometimes, as Mathilde was saying, over the border. We can hear from an 83-year-old man in the Chadian village of Khartoum tell of armed gunmen who target his village.
The whole village was burned to the ground. Because I can't run away, I was helped and brought here for rescue.
Let me begin with you, Claire Nicolet, because you still have a team not in Al Janina anymore, but in another one of Darfur's provinces, in Al Fashir, in the capital. What is it?
North Darfur.
North Darfur.
Yes.
At this point in time, how are you getting to your teams? Is it through Chad?
Yeah, so that's the point. So we do have a team in Al Janina still, and we do have a team in Adre also, just by the border to Al Janina, and we have a team in Al Fashir. So at the moment, that's exactly what we are trying to do, to make people enter, and also, of course, the supplies through Chad. So this is really a situation we are trying to discuss with both authorities, and the Chadian authorities are quite welcoming us for passing.
Welcoming you, because you heard Mathilde Vu describe that the pressure this puts on South Sudan, refugees having to go back the other way.
Yes.
What about for Chad? Is it pressure on the Chadians?
Yeah, so Chad is very specific because of what we just described, that this situation with Darfur is for years now. And there are lots of movements all the time between Chad and Darfur. And even this Khartoum place, there are people who came before the start of this conflict. They were already fleeing the situation. And Janina, it's the same for a few years now. The situation is quite bad. Of course, now it's way worse. And so Chadian, they are a bit ready, and that's why also we have a project there in Adre by the border, because there are lots of movements always of refugees in and out. Yes, the situation is of course we have to get prepared, and I know that lots of humanitarian actors are getting prepared in Chad for this influx, and there is the influx of course what we are mentioning now, of the refugees, but the other point also as well is because of the situation in Janina from the hospitals. They are not functioning. So even though we are still team on the ground, they cannot really work at the moment. And so Sudanese, they want to bring in also wounded to Chad. And that we are trying to get ready for. Unfortunately, the situation of the security on the road is not making it possible at the moment. So, of course, there will be an important impact on Chad for sure, for all these reasons. But wounded, refugees as well. So this is what we are, as humanitarian also, getting prepared to.
Al Eldin Awad, no good. It's a confusing situation. People in the west of Sudan, they see people with weapons, some in uniforms. It's not always clear who is who. At this point in time, is it a civil war, or is it still this rivalry between two factions that are within the high halls of power?
Okay, Francois, it's a good question. Actually, the answer of this question will answer also your third interviewer or your third guest, Matuda, that when she said that the ceasefire, is it respectable or no? We see that the army have a conflict in between the center of the power in the army. Al-Burhan gets out and said, yes, we will have a ceasefire, we accept. And at the same time, other commanders or other colonels get out, like Kabashi and Yasser Atta, say, no, there is no negotiation, there is no ceasefire, and this is a military battle, and it's going to be finished militarily and not political negotiation. So this distinction or this difference inside the military, the Sudan Armed Forces, make this problem. It makes the irrespective of the ceasefire, where one of the commander, the first commander, the Al-Burhan, get out and said, okay, and there is other people said no. So this difference, what makes the ceasefire irrespectable, and always there is an Air Force jet. So the issue is coming from the causation of the problem and the causation of the war. That is the Muslim Brotherhood inside the army. Throughout the Al-Bashir regime in 30 years, there's a much Muslim Brotherhood officers and a big colonels with a larger rank and higher rank who are dictating the army work. Right now, what we are facing that the army is splitting. There is Al-Burhan on one side, or one voice is that said, okay, let's sit for negotiation, and other voice said, no, we are going to finish this by a military work, and it's a military battle, and these rapid support forces are rebels. We heard these rebels all over Sudan time since independence. We heard in Jongarang in the south, we heard in the West Darfur, and neither of them finished militarily. At the end, it finished with negotiation. So if people can just get out these people who are like improving or calling for a military cessation and military finishing of this battle, then we can sit for a negotiation and we can get a respectable ceasefire and we can get to peace. But with these people inside the Sudan Armed Forces like Kabashi, Asra'ata, Ibrahim Jabir, the people are saying it's a military battle and we are not fit for negotiation and these rapid support forces are rebels, we will not get a good ceasefire. According to West Al-Jenaina or Darfur, Al-Jenaina or West Darfur have a huge connection between it and Chad. There is much of tribes going in between. Yes, there is some civilian issues in between, and even it was there in the transitional time, in Hamdok time. Me personally, I one of the doctors or surgeons who traveled there during the clashes. But this time, the military, there is the same people, the same group in the military who are pushing for no ceasefire and for more escalating the situation, are having contribution to that problem that happened there, and they leave the stores of the weapon in the headquarters of army in Al-Jenaina and in the police centers open, and then the people get armed, and they start this civil issue. So this is the main problem. If we reach this cause and this main problem, then we can solve the issue and we can have a good ceasefire and negotiation.
Alam Ahmed, you agree that right now it's unclear as to who's got the upper hand, and that the Islamists who laid low during most of the last 4 years could play a deciding role?
There's two things which are facts. I mean, no one can dispute them. When we had the revolution and General Burhan took his position as the president of the Supreme Council and so on, everyone knew that, and it's fact. Those people who are leading the army now, Al-Burhan, Al-Ata, Kabbashi, those are the team of the former Omar al-Bashir. No dispute about that. This is his team. Even just before coupling of Omar al-Bashir, these are his men. These are his assistant, his right hand and left hand. So everyone is still not happy. Many people actually in the political parties, they talked about this since the revolution. That those people are the same, you're just having the different name, but it's the same people. They are the al-Bashir team, not only supporter, they are his team. So that's number one fact. Number two facts, during these last 18 days, there is no question. It's very clear. We follow this from the social media, from TV interviews, from everywhere, Twitter accounts, from every network of Sudanese in and outside Sudan. Those Brotherhood supporters or members, they are fully supporting the army. So it goes very well in coincide of what I said earlier. So there is a clear relationship between those people who are from the previous, or they're still considering themselves a political party, although it's been officially been dismantled, the Omar al-Bashir regime, all of them, we can see them in all social media clearly advocating and supporting the army, and they're all against Hemeti. So you can make a clear connection between the brotherhoods and the army. And as I said earlier, the army, we all know, there's no dispute about it. It's all led by those from the brotherhoods or the team of Omar al-Bashir.
Okay, so here's
where is this leading us?
This is where it gets this is where it gets a little confusing, because both sides are trying to rally support. General al-Burhan's envoy, his name is Dafawa al-Hajj Ali, welcomed in Cairo by Egypt's foreign minister this Tuesday. On Saturday, he was in Riyadh, where he was also granted an audience by the foreign minister. The junta, which is urging the Arab League to publicly condemn Hemeti. And we had the Egyptian president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, giving an interview to Japanese newspaper Asahi Shinbun. But Sisi warned, "We will not interfere in the domestic politics of other nations because we do not want to further complicate the situation," he said in that interview. So Egypt, whose current president is the sworn enemy of the Muslim Brotherhood, is he still backing al-Burhan? Muzan al-Nil, your thoughts? Muzan al-Nil, can you hear us? We seem to have lost the connection there with Port Sudan. Apologies for that. Mathilde Vu, when you look at who's backing who, and this is an important question because we're wondering if both sides can run out of steam, or whether or not they have foreign backers that can supply their war efforts. How do you see it right now?
What you just described is a very, very complex conflict. And honestly, what our teams are seeing on the ground are just the people who are suffering. And, regardless of who's backing who, right now we're just seeing indiscriminate violence in the middle of cities, no respect for civilian lives, no respect for hospitals, schools, no respect for people who are fleeing. Trying to flee and save their lives in, across the country. So regardless of, the different, let's say, global politicking, what humanitarian organization is asking for is basic respect for international humanitarian law, protection of civilians, and for this to be done immediately.
Is there, I'll put the question to you, Alaeddin Awad No Good. Who's got the most clout right now in the international community to get the fighting to stop?
Okay, Francois, it's a good question. But what your last guest said, this is the humanitarian issue. That's we are not interested in who's supporting who. But actually, if you know it very well, it can solve the humanitarian issue, because the Muslim Brotherhood or the Islamists have no respect for any humanitarian issues. They have no respect for hospitals. They can bomb the hospital. Me, myself, the hospital I work in was bombed 3 times the war, and the fourth bomb was in the nurse hostel, and it gets on fire. We have a 19 hospital that's bombed by airstrike. So who's taking the airstrike is the Sudan armed forces, and who's controlling is the Islamists. Also in the neighborhoods was bombed also, and the neighborhood that bombed is the most powerful neighborhoods in the resistance committee that was responsible for Sudan's Great Revolution in 2018. So it seems that Islamists is punishing the Sudanese nation in having the revolution.
Yeah, but where we have trouble, excuse me for interrupting, Aladdin, where we have trouble following is if General Al-Burhan, who went to military academy with Egypt's president, if the two of them are allies, how can it be, since Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is the sworn enemy of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yeah, that's a good question, Francois. To answer this question, you have to look for the Egypt rule, the role of Egypt throughout the revolution. Egypt was not happy with the democratic transition. When Hamdok went to Egypt and said that we have a historic problem with Egypt and we have to sit down and solve it, then the Egyptian president was unhappy. And the Burhan, before the 25th October coup to 2021, 48 hours he was in Egypt, and Egypt supported the Al-Burhan coup on Hamdok transitional government in 25th October 2021. But the coup failed. And then we have this framework agreement and the political process. And also Egypt was not happy with this political process by evidence. Number one, not even the Egyptian ambassador in Khartoum attended the signature of the framework agreement, but he attended what's called the Democratic Coalition Party formation, which is the party that's against the framework agreement and against the political process. And the Egyptian also bring all the political parties that's in the democratic coalition that's called the other FFC, the Force of Freedom and Change in Egypt, and get out with a declaration that the soldiers or the militants should continue in power, sharing with the civilians. And this concept was all Sudanese nation and Sudanese political parties refused after 25th October 2021 coup. So if you can see this, that you can get that Al-Sisi is very much supporter of Al-Burhan, and he's right now is backing him, and he is not okay with having a democratic transition and fully civilian controlled power in Sudan. Why? Because this will make very bad time for the economy of what Egypt's getting from raw material from Sudan, and this all advantage that gets from Sudan, and everything that's Egypt's getting from Sudan since Omar al-Bashir regime.
Since it fell. Claire Nicolet, let me ask you, there's we've been last 3 weeks trying to figure out who's close to who. Hemeti closer to the Gulf states. He's got his business ties with gold mines, with Russia as well. We talked about nominal ties perhaps with Libya's strongman in the east. We've just talked about the other side, about the civilians being the losers in all of this. Is it the end of the so-called revolution? What are your teams on the ground telling you as far as that goes?
Well, I think you exactly mentioned the problem. Who is trapped in the story? The civilians. Really trapped, like physically, because we discussed about it already. In Khartoum, they are trapped. In Darfur, they are trapped. So now, that's why, indeed, the issue for us is, as humanitarian and as, I think, international also communities, it's how this situation stops, and at least we can have access to all these people who are now missing everything, basically, because healthcare, we spoke about water, we spoke about food, So it's really they are almost destroying the country at the moment. So that's the main issue now. How we can really give support to these civilians.
Muzan Al-Nil, where should the Sudanese, where should humanitarian efforts be turning when it comes to foreign powers to get those supplies in? Who's got the best shot at getting these two sides to stop fighting? Is there anybody from the outside who can influence this?
Well, yeah, we know that there are many sides that can influence them. I hope I'm not repeating something that your guest said before, since I lost connection for some minutes, but I heard one of your guests talking about how the different regional powers, anti-democratic regional powers, have different relations with both sides, the army and the RSF. That is true, and we saw them over the years supporting and putting their economic and political power behind both those sides. In 2019, for example, to force them as a government on the Sudanese people. Those same war criminals who have started a war in our city. Right now, we're forced on us by regional powers. We also saw how international powers, Western and international diplomats and EU diplomats have forced the Juba Agreement on us by putting their political and economic power behind it, and which we can draw straight lines from it to the coup and then to this current war. So, of course, yes, they can put their political and economic power behind forcing both war criminals to stop the war. We know that it's not in their interest. We saw them over the years put the stability of the status quo over a democratic governance and civilian governance in Sudan. But we hope that they understand that maybe stability is in the interest of everybody, and maybe even if the cost is that Sudanese people will get to rule themselves and get a civilian government, which is a right that every person has, maybe that is not so bad that they keep supporting war criminals. So, of course, yes, they can do this. What they can also do, what we know that they will not, is just support the will of the Sudanese people. As I said, that's not in their interest. I'm not sure if international diplomats are already talking about sanctions, but I hope not. Sanctions have not been effective in any way, and I do not think even if they put sanctions on, for example, the RSF, they will be putting sanctions on the UAE that is buying gold from the RSF. So sanctions have always been a decorative lie that never really done anything. We've been under the government of Bashir that was under sanctions for 20 years that did not bring it down. It was us in the streets that brought it down. So all the international community better do is, first of all, maybe find a way to evaluate their previous failures that made us reach this situation. It was all because of the choices they supported, and because of them, they kept saying that Sudanese people are not realistic to ask to govern themselves, and they should just accept those war criminals. This needs to be evaluated. Those diplomats need to be put on trial, whether literally or figuratively, but it's enough. To have we need to stop have those international organizations just going around creating wars with no consequences and doing nothing but building CVs for top staff, inefficient and stupid top staff like the ones we have right now in Sudan. We need them to put their political power behind stopping the war. That's all. The rest we can deal with. We can take care of our own country.
And take care of our own country. We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, because there's so much more to ask about. I want to thank you, Muzan Al-Nin, for joining us from Port Sudan. I want to thank Ali Eldin Awad No Good for being with us from the capital, Khartoum, Alam Ahmed in London, Mathilde Vu in Nairobi. Claire Nicolet, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.